You are listening to the fifth segment of our 8-part series, Colds and Flus, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. I'm so glad to be with you. And hello to all the listeners. Great blessings to everyone. Really enjoying spending these two deep winter months here, talking about colds and flus, and especially as we move out of the winter and into the very early part of spring. In terms of what's going on outside with the plants, spring actually begins on Groundhog Day at the beginning of February, and kind of culminates at spring equinox with the flowers and the birds and all of that. And so I find it very exciting and interesting to really get out into the very beginning of spring and really feel what's happening with the earth and with the plants. It's going to burst forth into all of that bloom. And March and sometimes April were thought of as the months of starvation. In many cultures, the preserved food was eaten by the very early spring. And there was not a lot of new growth and erratic weather. It could be very cold. And so that was the time, in fact, when people tended to get the sickest and needed the most medicine. So I'm glad that we're really focusing in on that in what are sometimes called the lean months, the months where it can be very hard to get enough. So we have so far looked at colds and flus and gotten an idea of what they are and what the difference between a virus and a bacteria is. Colds and flus both being viral infections and being dealt with part of the immune system that has to learn each virus and how to take care of it, how to deal with that virus, as opposed to the innate part of the immune system, which deals with bacteria and which, as its name implies, kind of comes on the scene knowing how to take care of bacteria. And we could kind of say that viruses are more like women and bacteria more like men. Once you know one bacteria, you know them all, you know how to deal with them. But all viruses are different. You don't know one, you don't know anything about the next virus. We talked about the immune system and how these two parts are on a teeter-totter. So if the part that's dealing with viruses is active and there's a lot of stuff happening in that part of the immune system, then the part that's dealing with bacterial infections is not given it all that it has. And so it's pretty easy for bacterial infections to creep in when we have a viral infection. And this month we're going to be looking a little more deeply at those bacterial infections. Last month, we pretty much kept ourselves focused on improving our ability to deal specifically with cold viruses and flu viruses, and a variety of foods, including sauerkraut, including astragalus, which is a root from the pea and bean family, into our food, and elderberry, and treating that as a food as well as a medicine. We talked about antiviral herbs, St. John's wort, Luthro, bone set, and we made a distinction between hot colds and cold colds. So if you missed what we did last month, it's all archived and you can go back and you can check into all that. And this month, as I said, we're going to focus more in on what's going on with bacterial infections when we're dealing with colds and flus, and those would be the itises. So if you have a cold and it becomes bronchitis, or if you have a sore throat, it becomes laryngitis, or if you have a stuffed up nose and it becomes sinusitis. The itis ending means inflammation, usually means bacterial infection. and we can help ourselves deal with these bacterial infections with a variety of different herbs and foods and strategies. And strategy, of course, the primary strategy is hand washing. We talked a little bit last month about the cold center in England that did their best to, uncover all the mother's tales about how you get a cold. If you go outside with your hair wet, you'll get a cold. If you go outside without underwear, you get a cold. If you go outside without socks, you'll get a cold, so on and so forth. And they tried all of these ways to, get people to have a cold. They would, have the cold virus around and then have them do these things, and they, by and large, didn't get colds. But if they played cards with somebody who had a cold, they would get a cold. And thus we get from these ongoing studies that colds, the flu, and cold viruses are primarily passed not by what we're wearing or if our hair is wet or who we're hugging or kissing, but who we're touching hands with. And where our hands are touching, where other hands have just been. Again, remember that viruses don't have a cell wall and therefore are very vulnerable and usually do not have the capacity to live for very long outside a body. There are exceptions to that rule, like the human papillomavirus, which can actually live for several days outside of a host body. But most viruses depend on a direct contact. You touch something somebody else has touched, the virus is on your hand, and then you touch your nose or your eyes. And people who are videotaped just going about their ordinary days are surprised at how many times they touch their eyes or their nose. So hand washing has become the thing, and not just hand washing, which is all very well and good. I'm all for hand washing, but hand sanitizing, with the idea that we are going to get rid of anything that's unsanitary on our hands. So unsanitary, sanitary, we're going to sanitize our hands. And this is part, to me, of a very warlike mentality, where we say, oh my goodness, there's a mosquito out there, kill everything that flies. So, yes, there are viral particles that cause colds and flus out there. It is true. But killing everything doesn't necessarily help the situation. So there are basically two different kinds of hand sanitizers. One kind is the kind that relies on usually a specific chemical called triclosan. And triclosan has been found in the cord blood, the umbilical cord blood of every baby tested for the past 15 years in the United States. There is some scientific evidence to back up that triclosan could be a carcinogen, and especially with early exposure to it. Many European countries have banned triclosan because of this preliminary evidence of there being some problem with it. And more people in the United States are learning that hand sanitizers with triclosan are not ideal for them or for the environment. And the environment including our children and grandchildren. The second primary type of hand sanitizer, and I'm talking about the ubiquitous hand sanitizers that I now see just about everywhere. Pumps of hand sanitizers on people's desks, pumps mounted on the wall of buildings where I go in, supermarkets, places like that. And many of those are alcohol-based. And alcohol-based hand sanitizers are not so much of a problem. We are generally used to alcohol, and while it can be very drying to the skin, especially if overused, in and of itself, alcohol-based hand sanitizers are definitely preferable to any with triclosan or any other chemical in them. There is a very small subset of hand sanitizers, which are hand sanitizers that contain essential oils. And in the last show this month, I'm going to be talking a little bit about why I avoid essential oils, especially when I have a viral infection. But let me just include them here, that if you're thinking, well, I'm not using one of the chemicals, I'm using one of the essential oils, please understand that as far as I'm concerned, and I will explain this in the last show, essential oils are chemicals. They are drugs. They are not natural plants, to my mind. Certainly they're natural. Certainly they're organic in the same way that petroleum is natural and organic, but that doesn't mean that it's something that I would feel safe or comfortable ever putting in my body. But I've saved the worst for last. And that is that there is a growing body of scientific evidence that washing your hands with anything doesn't help. In other words, washing your hands with running water and brisk friction by rubbing your hands together is as effective as using a hand sanitizer. Now, I've had people tell me, well, it's just not as convenient. And I certainly understand that. On the other hand, when we are working in a situation where there might be so much contamination that we would have to be washing our hands every 5 minutes, as one person told me, my suggestion to her was to wear gloves and really monitor how much you touch your face. Train yourself to touch your face with your forearm or your elbow, and wearing a rubber glove will help you to remember that. So I'm a big fan of hand washing, but I'm a big fan of hand washing with just running water. And as I said, brisk friction especially. Interlacing the fingers in a comb-like fashion and rubbing them up and down and back and forth across each other, because, of course, that's where bacteria and viral particles hang out, is in the webbing between the fingers, not so much on the part of the hands that most people wash, which is the kind of front flat part of the hands. In a study looking at how much with bacteria was eliminated from the hands by washing, they found that women wearing rings kept a goodly amount of the bacteria on their hands even after washing. Even after washing with soap or with hand sanitizers, because the bacteria and the viral particles were snuggled up underneath the ring. So think about what you're doing when you're washing your hands, and also use that paper towel that you've used to dry your hands to open the door. If you're in a public restroom, you think about the door handle, just like the playing cards, is actually the place where you're going to get most of what you're going to get on your hands. So if you're washing up before a meal out or after toileting, use that towel to open the door and toss it back in the wastebasket when you leave. Hand washing is definitely something that really helps. But hand sanitizers, I wouldn't use them at all. We have some antibacterial herbs that I want to talk about. Echinacea, garlic, and Yarrow. Dr. James Duke, who keeps a very large database about herb constituents and herb properties, says that of the top herbs that counter the flu, garlic is the queen of them all. He says there is only one other herb that comes anywhere near to the number of citations that is available to help counter the flu in terms of herbal ability, and that, interestingly enough, is pomegranate, which I'm mentioning. And pure pomegranate juice seems to be a pretty powerful antiviral, but garlic is the best of them all. There are a variety of different ways to ingest garlic, and I remember quite some years ago now, the Consumer Reports Group decided that they were going to test garlic in the various forms that garlic was available in, anywhere from fresh garlic to dehydrated garlic to powdered garlic to garlic in capsules. And they were looking primarily for an active component called allicin. And allicin is thought to be the part of the garlic that really kills the viruses. Now, there are other constituents in garlic, and they do other things as well, especially wonderful cardiovascular things. But Consumer Reports is really looking for allicin. And the results of their investigation were quite amazing. They found that dehydrated and powdered garlic had more allicin for less cost than any other form of garlic. So if you, like many people, don't especially care for the sharp taste or the garlicky breath that comes from eating garlic in food or eating raw garlic, which certainly some people recommend if you're dealing with colds and flus to eat raw garlic. You don't have to say, garlic, it's too much for me. I can't handle it. You can get wonderful powdered dehydrated garlic. I get an organic powdered garlic, and we use it lavishly in our foods. If we're making tomato sauce, big spoonful of it in there, big spoonful in salad dressings, sprinkle some on if you're frying potatoes. So easy to use garlic this way, and easy enough to really put a lot in your food as well. One of my ongoing apprentice groups, there was a student who was very sharp, and she asked what kinds of periodicals I was reading and asked about them, and actually subscribed to some of them. And this apprentice group, this ongoing group, met once a year for a long weekend, a 3-day weekend. And in one of the periodicals that I knew that she had subscribed to, there was a very interesting article about allicin in raw garlic. And it said that if you cut raw garlic and leave it out for several minutes, that the amount of allicin in the raw garlic grows and grows and grows. And that during the first 5 minutes after you mince up the garlic, the amount of allicin just increases and increases. And so they're now suggesting that that's what's done. Now, I had read that, and I suspected that she had too. And I had always been a little twitchy about my minced garlic. I always liked to mince the garlic just before I put it in the food, and didn't like to mince it and leave it laying on the counter. To my mind, that was oxidizing. So I made special note of this, and she came to me afterwards and she said, I was so glad that you were able to change your mind about the garlic. I said, well, to me, that's one of the great delights of continuing investigation, is that we can understand how something works, but then somebody can look at it from a whole other viewpoint and say, hey, one of the things that happens when the garlic oxidizes is that allicin is actually created by that oxidative process. And when we were talking about tea, back in the shows about tonics, we talked about how that oxidative process in tea leaves also gives rise to special antioxidant things. So, however you are willing to eat garlic, whether you do like it raw, mince it up, you can cook it, just let it sit for 2 to 5 minutes before cooking it. You can have it raw. There are those who absolutely swear that eating raw garlic gets rid of colds and flus immediately. I find if I eat raw garlic, it kind of bounces on my stomach, and I'm not so sure, but that maybe I'm going to throw it up. The only way I've ever really enjoyed raw garlic is with a mentor of mine who used to start his day by, he would peel 2 oranges, 1 for him and 1 for me. He would peel 6 cloves of garlic, 3 for me and 3 for him, mince them up, sprinkle them over the orange sections, and then pour olive oil and a little bit of honey or maple syrup, if we were at my house, over the whole thing, and that's what we would have for breakfast. And you know, it sounds really weird, but it tastes really good, and I was definitely able to eat large amounts of garlic that way. I remember the first time when I was living in Manhattan that I went to one of the big produce markets out on First Avenue, and they were selling garlic by the pound, and I couldn't imagine what anyone would do with a pound of garlic. And now I usually buy 6 to 8 pounds of garlic every single year. We do our best to have garlic on a daily basis, not just the great cardiovascular effects, but also proven anti-cancer effects as well. Garlic, looking to have a healthier winter, garlic can really be your ally. Echinacea is perhaps one of the best-known herbs, and its name has been linked to colds and flus. Some recent research with Echinacea tincture has led to what appears to be some pretty good evidence that taking Echinacea can indeed reduce the possibility of getting a cold. The Echinacea tincture that was used was a proprietary tincture made in Switzerland, and the scientists quite rightly say, well, we can only say that this brand of Echinacea tincture has been shown, if taken a dropperful a day on a daily basis throughout the cold and flu season, to reduce the number of colds that people get. And for some people, that reduction is all the way to no colds and flus at all. I have really a lot to say about Echinacea, and our time for this week is getting smaller. So we're going to talk some more about Echinacea next week, and we're going to go on to our third herb for this week, which is yarrow. Now, yarrow won't be a new herb to you if you've been listening to me talk, because I have mentioned yarrow, especially in the sessions on my herbal medicine chest. It's one of my dear allies in my herbal medicine chest. But yarrow, which is a weed of fields all over the world, is cherished by people all over the world as being one of the best herbs to use when dealing with colds and flus. I was introduced to it as the gypsy cold herb. that when gypsies got a cold, they would brew up some yarrow. They would usually, I was told, add red clover and mint to it to make it be a little better tasting. Yarrow is, in fact, one of the most powerful antibacterial herbs known. In fact, science has established that yarrow kills hundreds of different bacteria, both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, and yarrow kills them both systemically and on contact. So if I was in a situation where I needed to sanitize my hands, I would keep a dropper bottle of yarrow tincture nearby, and I would put 1 drop of yarrow tincture, there's your alcohol, on my hand. A cup of yarrow tea would certainly be a very wonderful thing indeed. So yarrow tincture or yarrow tea. We don't want to make an infusion from the yarrow, however. One of my favorite yarrow stories has to do with 2 school-age children who were tired of getting colds all winter long and felt that it was because they were in public school. And they were talking to their mom about this during the summer. And they were out in a field, and she suggested that they make some yarrow tincture, and they did. And 6 weeks later, when school started, their yarrow tincture was ready to use. And they kept it on the table where they ate breakfast. And some mornings, they would look at each other, the 2 children, and say, today's a yarrow day, and they would put some yarrow tincture in their milk or in their cereal or whatever it was they were eating. And they were very happy to report to me that at the end of that winter that they had hardly got sick at all. So whether, like these 2 herbal children, you use yarrow as a preventative, or whether, like the gypsies, you use yarrow as a curative, yarrow tea and yarrow tincture, definitely wonderful allies to have in your cupboard against cold and flu season. Oh, well, as I said, we're going to have to carry over some information about Echinacea to next week, when we're going to be talking about what the bees know and all kinds of wonderful bee things. We're going to continue on after that with coughs and chest congestion, and then our last show will wrap it all up, and I'll talk about some things that I avoid, like essential oils, when I have a cold or when I'm trying to prevent getting a cold. I hope you come and visit me at SusunWeed.com, and if you're interested in my books, please come to WiseWomanBookshop.com. There you'll find Wise Woman Herbal for the Child during here. Healing Wise, the big green book for everyone. Breast Cancer, ? Breast Health, ! The Wise Woman Way. New Menopausal Cares, The Wise Woman Way. And my newest book, down there, Sexual and Reproductive Health, The Wise Woman Way. Thank you, Gemini, and thank you, everyone at Time Monk Radio.
Thank you, Susan. This completes part 5 of our 8-part series, Colds and Flus, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.